Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Cloud Chats, a Twitch series where we explore the trends and projects in open source cloud development. Cloud Chat is brought to you by the Eclipse Cloud Development Tools Working Group. You'll probably hear us refer to that just as the ECD Tools Working Group in this series, and it is part of the Eclipse Foundation. Now you might know Eclipse from the desktop IDE, and though this project continues, Cloud Dev Tools supports next generation cloud native tools. Today, I'm joined by Rob Morin. He's the Director of Engineering of Online Tools at ARM and a chair of the ECD Tools Embedded Special Interest Group. My name is Jesse Williams, and as always, I'm your host. So let's hop into it. Rob, first off, thanks so much for joining us today.
No problem, Jesse. Glad to be here.
Yeah, so why don't you introduce quickly Theia, because that's going to be the topic of discussion, and ARM's involvement in the project.
Sure. So Theia is an open source IDE framework from Eclipse, which ARM are currently using to develop a few different IDE products, one called Mbed Studio and one called Keil Studio Cloud.
Awesome. So how are you involved in the ECD Tools Working Group?
So I'm a committer for Theia, which means that I'm involved in the code side of things, sort of looking at pull requests and upstreaming fixes and changes, new features. And I'm also the chair for the special interest group for embedded development on top of Theia, as you outlined, where we are looking at how Theia can be used to support embedded developers.
That's awesome. I know the special interest group for embedded IDEs here in the ECD Tools Working Group is actually fairly new, correct?
That's right. So it's been running for a couple of months now. We have meetings every month or so. We have about 5 or 6 sort of member companies currently involved. And we've just started out looking at the initiatives and what the group's going to do.
That's awesome. I really want to learn more about that. But for now, let's stick with Theia. Mm-hmm. How is ARM actually using Theia?
Yeah, good question. So as I've mentioned, there's a couple of products that we are developing based on the Theia IDE framework. The first one is called Mbed Studio, and this is a desktop application. We delivered the first release of that around 18 months ago, and I believe it was one of the first desktop apps written using Theia. And it's an IDE for people that use the Mbed OS operating system for embedded development to develop for hardware that's supported in Mbed OS. So it's an IDE that brings together sort of like the key workflows for identifying your board, allowing you to build applications that can run on different bits of hardware, and then sort of going through deploying and debugging those applications as well. And then more recently, we have a product called Keil Studio Cloud, which, using the same code base, takes a lot of those workflows and also encapsulates a new ecosystem it's a new feature anyway. It encapsulates the CMSys ecosystem as well, and it's an IDE that's developed to be delivered in a browser environment, and then through that environment we can also allow people to undertake development for both the Mbed OS ecosystem and the CMSys ecosystem, and again undertake builds in the cloud, deploy these to hardware, and actually debug them through their browser.
Are you using Theia for anything else?
Not currently, no. So Theia is the core for both of these products, but as I already mentioned, it's just one code base we're using to deploy both the Mbed desktop product and the cloud Keil Studio product too.
That's awesome. So just for the listeners who might not be really familiar with Theia, you refer to Theia as a framework and not necessarily an IDE. Is Theia, I think a lot of people think that Theia can just be downloaded right off the shelf and kind of be like your editor, like that you just open up, same as you could with Eclipse. Is that not the case, or is that actually, is that something that you can do?
As it stands today, Theia is primarily a framework, and it's being looked at by lots of different companies as the basis of new IDEs. There actually is a way to download it. There is a thing called Theia Blueprint, which is a build of Theia, just doesn't have many plugins in it, and it's quite basic, that you can go ahead and download. But primarily Theia, I think, as it's currently architected, is mainly used as a basis for other IDEs. You may get different experiences if you wanted an editor by using some something like VS Code or VS Codium, if that's all you really wanted. But if you want something that's going to be a core sort of IDE that you're going to build something from yourself and have a lot of control over the experiences, then Theia might be for you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for your specific use case of Theia, who are your users and what unique features are you bringing to the IDE that others might not?
That's a good question. So, as I said, we've got a couple of different products. Mbed OS, our user base are users of the existing Mbed operating system. We have about 500,000 registered users who use Mbed OS, and a good portion of those people also use the Mbed Studio desktop tool. What's unique in the tool for our customers or our users is the ability to target workflows towards their specific embedded development needs. So within the Mbed OS ecosystem, we have between 1 and 200 boards that are supported, and they can be automatically detected by the IDE, so the environment is set up accordingly. We know how to build for those specific bits of hardware. We know how to deploy to them, and we know how to debug them as well. And that whole sort of end-to-end experience is encapsulated, and it's quite unique to Mbed Studio, and it's not something you're likely to get from sort of like other IDEs. But at the same time, we do sort of utilize lots of extensions and plugins and things which are a little more common. So things like language servers and IntelliSense for C code and things like that are things which bolster that whole experience but aren't necessarily unique to us. And then taking that online with the Keil Studio IDE, I think the most unique part of that, again, is around the hardware interactivity and the fact that we can get connections from the hardware plugged in locally on your machine to talk to your browser and then undertake similar sort of activities around detection, deployment, debug, and monitoring as well through serial ports and things like that.
Yeah. So you said something about Mbed Studio that I hadn't caught when you explained it to me prior to this recording, but you said that it recognizes what you need in the environment. Does it like configure everything for you?
So it configures things like the way that the build is undertaken. So there are certain flags and configurations set up specifically in Mbed OS, which can be turned on or off based on the target you're using. So we detect the target that's been plugged in, and that is fed into the Mbed OS build system. So then the configuration is undertaken during the build.
Gosh, that's really cool. I didn't know that it did that. So I guess the next question is why, of all the options that you had, obviously there's a lot of open source IDEs, but why did you go with Theia?
So Theia and obvious other options are using VS Code or VS Codium. Both VS Code and VS Codium are sort of editors that the user can then extend, and they compose their experiences themselves based on the plugins they put into the product. With our product, we wanted to have, especially with Mbed Studio, an entirely sort of like installable IDE that gave you everything out of the box to undertake embedded development. So this is setting up your environment, having all the right tools available for you, as well as quite rich user experiences for undertaking detection and debugging and things like this. With VS Code-based products, you have less control over the user experience. The plugins are quite limited to areas they can modify within the whole UI. And what we wanted is an IDE which is very focused on that sort of development. So to that end, we don't necessarily let people extend the IDE. A lot of the complexity is hidden away from the user, so they don't need to worry about it. And it means that out of the box, it's a much easier experience. So yeah, primarily that's why we chose the Theia framework rather than an off-the-shelf IDE that we wanted to just extend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess I'm sure you had the conversations about, why don't we just, have our own fork of VS Code or VS Codium. Did you ever have that conversation, and why did you end up going with Theia?
Yeah, we do have this sort of conversation, and we look at what's out there today. We felt the architecture within Theia is a lot more easy to extend. We have to consider that not only are we adding features, but to get the experiences we want, we actually turn features off as well. And to some extent, we wanted the complete control that you get from the Theia code base with that. The fact that Theia also takes advantage of existing protocols such as the language server protocol, debug adapter protocol, and also the plugin architecture that VS Code has made very popular, does also mean that we have lots of options regards to how we deploy our features in future as well. We're not necessarily tied to Theia, which is quite an interesting way of doing this. So as it stands today, we felt that the Theia architecture gave us the most flexible approach to this, and it was very easy to be able to take that and bundle it up and create a very nice experience through our installers as well on the desktop. One thing around with that is when we developed Mbed Studio, we always had the idea of getting it online as well. And at the time, 18 months ago, Theia was primarily targeted as an online IDE first, which was less so for other options. This may be changing today, but it has meant that, as I've already mentioned, the same code base we've now been able to relatively trivially turn around and deploy online as well.
Yep. That makes sense. And Theia's got an incredibly vibrant community of committers as well, that I'm sure that's a major benefit for you as well.
That's right. So, I mean, a lot of partners that we work with at ARM are interested in Theia as well, and we see similar sort of faces turning up in these communities as well. So there is a lot of interest in that, and it's very beneficial to be able to work alongside these people and actually push the product forward.
So one of the things I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is, software development in itself has changed a lot. We're not on-prem anymore. Primarily, people are going to the cloud. You've got, just AI/ML is prevalent in, almost every piece of the development stack that you go and look at. You can find a company that's, advertising AI/ML as part of it. But IDEs, in many ways, they've stayed the same. You've got an editor, you've got a terminal, you've got a file tree, and then on the right hand side you've got some debugging and other things. And what are your thoughts? What's the next thing for IDEs? Are they going to go through a major shift, or do you think that it's going to kind of stay the same for a while?
I think the core experience you get through IDEs is going to be quite static. I think you're always going to be writing code in an editor, and that's going to be helping you out. And you're always going to want to be able to see your files and actually sort of undertake, as you say, sort of like your debugging and your other sort of things that you get out of IDEs today. I think where we're going to see changes is as sort of products become more complex. I think the way that you develop them and debug them needs to become more complex in lockstep with that. So I think we're going to see much more sort of focused niche areas, which are much more visual, around targeting where your application runs on a bit of hardware or in the cloud or throughout the whole stack, as well as considering things like security boundaries. So I still think there's going to be lots of like niche tools, but I don't see a lot of change around the sort of core experience you get from an editor today necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Do you think that, as IDEs become more cloud-based, do you see post-commit activities, things like CI/CD, shifting left towards the developer and kind of coming into the IDE more than they have before?
That's interesting, and I think it's based on the sort of products that are being developed. They may be quite simplistic or more simple or sort of easier products where getting everything to be a pre-commit hook or running locally so you find out as soon as possible if you've got any issues is absolutely a way that things are going to go. But I don't think that's necessarily going to be the right solution for everyone. In our case, for example, at ARM, when we write applications for hardware, we may need to run that on multiple devices to ensure that hardware or that the software still works on all these devices, and it's not practical to have lots of local devices necessarily connected to your development machine. So there's still going to be a need for post-commit hooks and things running in the cloud. So I think it's going to be based on the setup you have, and I think there might be a shift in the way that sort of pre or post hook sort of events happen. And you can imagine a situation where maybe there's some sort of AI logic that decides based on who you are and what you're working on where it runs these hooks. I think it's more important to find out as soon as possible if any of your changes have actually made any sort of regressions in your code. So I think it's less about where it runs, more about how quickly you find out what problems you might have caused, or the fact that you might have actually completed the feature. So yeah, I think it would be interesting to see what happens, but it might follow the same sort of sort of like evolvement you've seen with web development, where different products decide whether you're rendering on the server or on the client. You may see something like that with development, which may decide to run things locally or remotely, just using AI.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's one of the big selling points for Theia is really that flexibility. You can turn it into what you need, which is extremely appealing for developers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it gives you that base to, as I say, to create these niche tools that developers are going to need, or potentially set up environments which allow you to run your hooks locally, or tie into remote services that are doing this for you.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I would love to shift over to talking about the ECD Tools Embedded Special Interest Group, if you don't mind. So when I saw this announcement go out, I was pretty excited about it, because embedded use cases are obviously, they're really popular. You see them all the time, but it doesn't really seem like there's been any focused work around it. So it's cool to see kind of having something like that pop up. Is really exciting. Would you mind just kind of giving an overview of the group again?
Yeah, sure. So the special interest group came about because there's quite a few different sort of hardware vendors and people involved in embedded development that we talk to, both via the Theia community as well as part of ARM, who are interested in sort of like the next generation of IDEs and what it can bring. So we recognised there was lots of sort of common ground and common problems we wanted to overcome. So as I said, there's about 5 or 6 different companies involved in the group now. We've been running for a couple of months. We have a monthly meeting where we come together and talk about the initiatives we're looking at. And regarding that, we one of the first things we did is we had a good discussion around what problems people were trying to solve. We recognised lots of common issues that different companies had, and came up with a list of initiatives to work on, which include looking at maybe developing a CDT alike for Theia, so something a bit like the Eclipse CDT set of tools for C development, but something that's focused on embedded and C development on top of the Theia framework. So looking at what prior art there is out there today and what things that each of the companies could potentially either develop or donate to that project. Looking at some of the existing technologies that different companies have around memory inspection and debugging, and also sort of like data tracing from hardware and making that work in the embedded space as well as recognizing common sort of concerns around things like IntelliSense, ClangD, project formats, build systems, and those sort of things. Pretty much outlines all of the sort of initiatives we're looking at the moment, but it's still early days.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that, because you wouldn't think that those are pretty common features, that you would expect in an IDE. Is that just not normal for embedded use cases?
Well, I mean, these sort of features just don't exist necessarily in the right sort of way that's going to be targeted to an embedded engineer, and these are problems which need to be resolved. So why not pool resources and do it as a team rather than everyone coming up with their own way of doing it? And this group gives us a way to push that forward, and also sort of sharing the fruits of our successes as well, and sort of share those things and get us a lot further ahead. So each of the companies can focus on delivering their sort of like unique features on top of that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So let's say you want to become a member of the Embedded Special Interest Group. You have a desire to push this forward, whether it's just on your own. You constantly develop as an individual contributor, or maybe your company has a project that would benefit from this as well. How do you become a member, and then what would you say are kind of the key reasons that you might join?
Okay, I think there's a lot in there. So, Theia is an open source product. So, as an individual contributor, you can come along and create bug fixes or add new features, and just look at the source on GitHub. I think you have to sign a license based on that, which is the standard sort of Eclipse license around that, and you can get involved with that base project. We have the ECD working group, which you've already mentioned, and being membership of that automatically means you can join the special interest group for Embedded if you so wish. And the sort of benefits that brings is you can be involved in where we take Theia, the next sort of steps in Embedded. You can be involved in sort of highlighting or sort of like helping to guide what priorities and we're putting on different initiatives. And as I say, sort of taking advantage of some of the work we're doing there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. And if anyone's wondering, you can check that out at ecdtools.eclipse.org, and that'll allow you. There are links to become a member or sign up for the newsletter. But yeah, you can go check it out. And then Theia also has a website where you can get on the Discus and everything, or check out the code on GitHub or whatever you want to do. So there's a lot out there. It's easy to find, and I'll drop the links into the chat right now for you as well. So Rob, thank you. It's been awesome to learn about the embedded special interest group. We've got still a few minutes on our time here, so let's. I am curious about more of the community around Theia. What are you kind of seeing there? Is it growing? I know that from the looks of it, it's probably one of the more popular projects. But can you kind of tell us a little bit about what you guys have been doing there to help Theia grow in the way that it has?
Yeah, sure. I mean, Theia over the last few years has got lots of traction. We are starting to see lots of large pull requests coming in, which is taking both the quality and feature set. It will bring it along leaps and bounds, really. So you also mentioned at the beginning around Theia being potentially a downloadable product. There's quite a lot of efforts going into the Theia Blueprint product, which is it's almost a getting started version of Theia, which you can download and install if you wish. And I mean that almost gives you a blueprint of how you would create your own installers for an IDE based on Theia as well. So we have a regular developers meeting, which is public as well. So there's a meeting currently on every Tuesday. Details of that are on the wiki within the GitHub project. And as you've already mentioned, on theia-ide.org, there's a link to the Discuss forums where you can see what's going on. Come along and see what we're doing. Yeah.
Now, in our last episode, we talked to Sven about OpenVSX registry. Do you find that as OpenVSX registry is growing, that marketplace is growing, that Theia is seeing increased adoption?
I don't actually have any data on that, to be honest, because we are using Theia more as a sort of focused IDE that's specific plugins in that. We don't take advantage of the OpenVSX marketplace ourselves, apart from during development time. So unfortunately, that's not something I have much data on.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I always think it's interesting when you've got two projects, are they growing off of each other? And I think there's a lot of synergy that's created, and obviously Theia and some of the other projects that use Theia along with OpenVSX, that's obviously helping developers to get more value from something like Theia. But yeah, no worries on that. It'll be interesting to see how that evolves as Theia matures and as OpenVSX registry matures as well.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. I think it's interesting to see where Shay is taking Theia as well. So I think that's more of a sort of product which people can then take and sort of extend themselves, and taking advantage of these plugins that are published to the OpenVSX marketplace.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. Well, Rob, thank you so much for joining us. It's been exciting to hear about the embedded special interest group. It's been exciting to hear about ARM and how you're using Theia for embedded use cases, and best of luck with that.
Great, thanks, and thanks for having me along. Do come and join us and see what we're doing with Theia. Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks everyone. Just in closing, if you want to get involved with the ECD tools, like I said, go to ecdtools.eclipse.org. You can learn everything about this series happens once a month, so you can jump on, go ahead and subscribe to our Twitch. You can also check out ECD Tools on Twitter. And then there's another series called Cloud Tool Time, where we go a little bit more in depth into the actual tools that are part of the ECD Tools working group. So if you want to learn kind of the specifics about it, or even propose a talk, if you have something that you're interested in, you can go and check that out on the ECD Tools webpage. So once again, thanks for joining us. We're looking forward to seeing you next month.